So for advisors out there, you might be asking yourself, well, Paul, when you're working with a Gary, how deep into the weeds do you actually get with diligence on each of these private equity firms? And that is a great question. I, over time, have tended to shy away from actually making the CEO calls or being on the CEO call. So years ago, we used to do diligence on PE funds. I used to hop on a call with the private equity fund. We would be with the client. We would ask a lot of the questions on the client's behalf, and we still do that. But now when it's time to kind of do the cross-referencing, I used to actually get on the call. So I would be with my client. We would be in the office, or we might be on a conference call, and we would call Joe Blow, right? Hey, Joe, I saw you were part of Cedar Fork Capital for 3 years and you exited. And Joe's like, well, how'd you get my number? Did they give you my number? No, we did some research and we found it. Joe was a little bit surprised. Somebody would be checking that reference. And Joe then would get an opportunity to talk to Gary, and they would have a chit chat about what life was like at Cedar Fork. And what I realized over time is that the past references, especially when they had anything less than glowing, would say more when it was one-on-one with Gary, for example, the client, than with both Gary and myself on the phone. So over time, I just quit getting on those calls with former CEOs. I think it's a great opportunity for CEO and CEO to talk. They speak each other's language. They can ask a lot of those questions. I think it flows better, and I don't feel like they're as closed in, the references, when it's just one-on-one with the potential seller. So my recommendation, of course you can do that, but my recommendation would be let the client have those calls one-on-one. Of course, you though can drive the conversations with the private equity funds. Now, if a client is not outgoing and is a little bit timid asking those questions, sure, we should take a run at it. But the way that I do this is I make sure that the client has a smorgasbord of questions. Here's the questions. Here's why you should be concerned with this. Here's why you might want to ask this question. I provide that to the client. I get them thinking about it. And I actually like them to drive the questions, because I find that actually, quite frankly, when Gary asks the question in his own words, it's way easier for the private equity firm to respond in a way that he would understand. When I ask them, they're talking to another finance guy and they're using jargon. But when Gary understands the questions and Gary can ask them himself directly to the principals of the private equity firm, they really try hard to speak his language. So I feel like it's much more effective if you get the Garys of the world or your clients to actually ask the questions, both to the private equity funds as well as to the reference points. Now, I'll put a link below in the description, and I'll put a sample question sheet. Anyone can download that, whether you're a potential seller or another advisor, to look at what we provide clients. In addition to providing clients with questions, we've got to do the research, right? Like, we've got the databases, we've got the research teams, we've got the analysts, so they can dig in. I can give them, 40 private equity funds. They can pull all the platform acquisitions. They can calculate the add-on acquisitions using press release, using databases, using a lot of the stuff we have in-house. And they can provide the client kind of a full dossier on each private equity fund. Now, we don't want to do it on a ton of them. We really want the client to get the feel. So we've got price and terms, of course, that's most important in a lot of ways, but then also the client should get the right feel for the various different private equity funds. We whittle down the playing field, and I would say we do this on maybe the top 5 maximum on each deal process. And then the client can effectively look at all the deals that the private equity fund has done. They can look at who the former sellers were, the partners, did they stay around? So we try to go above and beyond and say, okay, Cedar Fork Capital bought ABC Company, and ABC Company was founded by Joe Smith. And so we see Joe Smith was the CEO for 2 years, and then Randy Coleman is now the CEO. So what happened to Mr. Smith? Did he quit? Was he fired? Was he run out of Dodge by the sheriff? We need to understand that, but it gives us a really good reason to talk to both Coleman as well as Smith, right? And we've got that on the document so that the client can see that. So I really encourage you as an advisor to do the research and put your client in the best position, because from the private equity funds, and again, I think most of these guys are straightforward and honest, and a lot of them everyone's got a shit show of a story, right? Almost all of these guys have had some sort of busted transaction, or they've retraded, or something bad's happened. A lot of them will say, hey, we're not proud of this, but here, talk to this guy. Like, we could have done better, and we learned from this, and here's what we learned from it. But I find that for the most part, when you ask for references, you're going to get testimonials. So in order to avoid that, you make sure you do as much research as possible so that you can, of course, talk to the testimonials, but you also want to talk to Joe Blow, who's like, oh, how did you find me? I've been hiding under a rock. Like, the deal was a total disaster, and I would never do it again.
Hello?
Hey, Joe, this is Gary calling. I'm contemplating doing a deal with Cedar Fork Capital, and I understand that you were a portfolio company at one point. You sold to them. Gary, Cedar Fork Capital, what are you talking about? Like, Clusterfuck Capital's more like it. Better watch your six, Gary. Those guys did me dirty. And, you know, you're inevitably going to have those situations where Gary talks to Joe Blow, and it was a unmitigated disaster. And what you'll realize is that Joe Blow was actually the Gary from the beginning of today's discussion. Like, Joe Blow was approached by the private equity firm, did zero due diligence, had no idea what difference private equity firm A was from B, looked at the headline number, didn't really assess the partner, got into bed with these guys, and then realized it wasn't what he thought it was going to be. And it wasn't because they lied to him. They were probably very honest with them. They were just speaking two very different languages. And when somebody's like, yeah, I am going to write you a check for $100 million. And by the way, you're going to roll $30 million into this new co. And I'm going to take this $30 million and I'm going to turn it into another $100 million 5 years from now. And they're thinking about generational wealth and all the stuff they're going to buy. They get tunnel vision. And they forget about all the details that go into this thing to make day-to-day life actually worth living. They get focused on the big numbers. They get focused on courtside at the Bulls, the watch, and the this and the that. So Joe Blow could very well have been Gary, and I think that's a great reference for this Gary as to what he shouldn't do. But he also needs to take things with a grain of salt. And I'm mentioning this because it's an important thing. Inevitably, there are portfolio companies, there are CEOs, founders that have had bad experiences, and it's actually not the private equity fund's fault. Or maybe it was their fault, but they learned a very valuable lesson. Will never do that again. And so you're an advisor, you're working really hard on a deal, you run this great process, huge numbers, and you're like, man, I am way better than I thought I was at this. And then the client does reference checks, everything's great. And then he talks to one guy. He's like, oh, those guys are bastards. Don't do a deal with them. And he's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do a deal with them. And you're like, oh, I just wasted a year of my life on this transaction. The seller screwed it up himself, or there was a misunderstanding, or the private equity firm did something wrong, but learned and repented for their sins. This kind of stuff happens. And that's the reason why I used to be on these calls in the early years, is because like this sort of stuff happened and I wasn't on the call. I was like, shit, I should have been on that call. I could fix this. But over time, I realized that it's better for me not to be on the call. It's better for Gary to hear from Joe Blow. And then when he brings all this stuff back, then you can sit down. The right thing to do is sit down with the partners at the private equity firm and say, hey, we had a call with Joe Blow, and it was an unfortunate call. You know, we heard a lot of things we didn't like, and give them the opportunity to explain. Because I do think that when I look at the private equity industry, I think that there are a lot of very, very good firms out there that have investors that are vested in the success of this. They do great deals. They try to deal fairly and honestly with the people that they partner with. And snafus do happen, so you don't want to necessarily throw the baby out with the bathwater. Here at Potomac, we love to kill it for our clients. And I think that education is the cornerstone which allows our clients to make the best decisions for themselves. The more you can understand about the nuances of how strategic acquirers work, how the operations of private equity firms work, and the psychology and the tactics of an M&A transaction, the better you're going to be when it comes time to pull the trigger. If you own a business and you're being contacted by strategic acquirers, search funds, private equity firms, and you're trying to size up what you might do, take a step back and give us a call. We'll help you forge a plan, whether that exit is a year from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. We'll help you think through a plan that is specifically tailored to your financial goals and objectives. So please contact us directly. I've put a link to the contact form in the description of this video, and you can also contact me directly on LinkedIn. Again, you can click on the link below to download the questions you should ask private equity. This is a culmination of 20 plus years and billions of dollars in transaction with private equity. And these are the questions that I recommend clients ask private equity firms before they do a transaction. It's probably something you're not going to want to miss. Further, if you got value from this video, you're not going to want to miss what we have coming up here in the coming weeks. We'll be doing the Valuation Masterclass. We'll be kicking off the Buy-Side M&A Masterclass, and we've got a lot more to say on private equity. And feel free to share this Masterclass series with somebody who you think might benefit from it. Again, I'm Paul Giannamore. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you on the next one.